all I see is a battle, you see my victory. When all I see is a mountain, you see a mountain move. And as I walk through the shadow, your love surrounds me. There's nothing to fear now, for I am safe with you. So when I fight, I'll fight on my knees, with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you, and every fear I lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. And if you are for me, who can be against me? For Jesus, there's nothing impossible for you. When all I see are the ashes, you see the beauty. Oh yeah. When all I see is the cross, God, you see an empty tomb. So when I fight, I'll fight on my knees, with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you, and every fear I lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. Almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadow, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. Almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadow, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. Almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadow, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. So when I fight, I'll fight on my knees, with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you, and every fear I lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. The devil thought he had a hold of me. He told so many lies that I believed. I got too weak to carry on, thought that I was too far gone. But then I heard a voice from Calvary, and now I'm singing, no more shackles on my feet. The devil's got no hold on me. Jesus' blood has set me free. The devil's got no hold on me. pierce my soul. And though the enemy is near, I'm not giving in to fear, 'cause you're the voice of truth that leads me home. So I'm singing, no more shackles on my feet. The devil's got no hold on me. Jesus' blood has set me free. The devil's got no hold on me. He's got no hold. Oh, the devil's got no hold on me. Right here, right now, this is the sound of freedom. Sing it out, sing it loud. The enemy has been defeated. Right here, right now, this is the sound of freedom. Sing it out, sing it loud. No more shackles on my feet. The devil's got no hold on me. No more shackles on my feet. The devil's got no hold on me. Jesus' blood set me free. The devil's got no hold on me. He's got no hold. Oh, the devil's got no hold on me. He's got no hold. The devil's got no hold on me. The devil's got no hold on me.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. So so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. Disappear where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart in a million different ways. Every precious one, a child who died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
Jesus, you led by example. You came, you saw the need, and you came to the cross to fulfill a desire, a payment that only you could fulfill. We come in this moment, Jesus, to give you glory, to give you honor, to lift you up. No matter where you're coming from today, no matter what the world has looked like for you in the last 72 hours, the last 48 hours, and the last week, there's a God that is merciful and loving here for you. The arms are open for you this morning. Jesus, may you be lifted high. May you be lifted high. In your glory, we give you these things. In the name of Jesus, we worship today. Amen. Welcome to the stage, my friend, Draven Van Gilder. Oh. Oh boy. Well, in case, so, appreciate it. So, if you guys didn't already know, I am not Pastor Shane. Okay, I'm Draven Van Gilder, and I'm here. I participate in next generation youth here at One Church, and I want to welcome you all to One Church. If it's your first time, we ask that you don't give anything at all except you let us know that you're here by filling out one of these hey cards at the back of the room in the corner back there. Oh boy.
Appreciate it. Enough the tithes. So there are buckets in the back of the left and right quarter of the room, and you could just place your offering in an envelope, or you could just put it in there. Either one works. Online giving, you can text the number 417-200-4104 and click the giving tab and select the amount that you like to give. You could also go to our website at onechurchjoplin.org, click the give tab, and once again, just put whatever amount you'd like to give in the box, and they will handle it from there. And now we have some announcements.
Church announcements and some random Did You Know facts. Our student ministry is doing snack bags for the hungry and the homeless. We're asking for donations including socks, travel size hygiene products, and snacks. If you bring donated items, you can drop those off at the store. We're doing Awana here at the church, and registration is open. You can register a child by going to our website, onechurchjoplin.org, and clicking the red bar at the top of the homepage. Speaking of Awana, the first night for Awana is September 22nd. And now for some random Did You Know facts. Did you know the average NFL lineman eats around 8,000 calories a day? Did you know a football shape isn't actually a shape at all? That's right, a football shape is actually called a prolate spheroid, which translates to long sphere. Did you know the first huddle was used in the 1890s by quarterback Paul Hubbard? Hubbard was deaf, and he was concerned the other team could read his hand signals, so he brought his team into a round formation to call his plays. Okay, and that's all I've got for you today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the service. If you have any questions about One Church or any of the announcements we've made today, make sure you stop by the corner after the service. And someone back there would be happy to help you with any information that you might need.
Told him next service we'll get him a football to hold, and then we'll be good. Hey, you did a great job. I'm proud of these students. Give it up for these guys. John, Joe. All right, so with that being said, kids, we love you. You're headed to Kids Church. We'll see you here in a little bit, and Draven's going to sing a song, all right? No, find someone you don't know. Welcome this morning to One Church. Say hello. Grab a cup of coffee. Use the bathroom if you need to. Right now is your chance. You got about 90 seconds.
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure. No. Welcome to One Church. I told myself coming in today, you're not going to cry. And I thought I was going to cry in my message, and I couldn't last. I started crying when the band got up and started playing. Would you guys do me a favor? Would you give it up for the youth band? These kids have been extremely nervous, and they have been putting in some hard work. They have been practicing. They've wanted to do this for a long time again, and I couldn't be more proud as a youth pastor. I really couldn't. When they got up here and they started singing, they started worshiping. I look back, the youth was worshiping. Man, tears began to flow. As a youth pastor, that's what you love to see. So I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for all the students who came out. If you liked the coffee, Dawson and Brody made it. If you did not like the coffee, we got it at Starbucks. So, just so you know. No, they did a great job. I'm proud of them. But going into this, I didn't know what I was going to speak on. I didn't know what the series was going to be or anything. And God just laid it on my heart. He says, I want you to tell your story. And I'm like, God, I don't want to tell my story. I don't like to talk about my story that well. God says, you're going to tell your story. So I had no idea what this was about. I don't think I'm courageous. I just think I survive. So this is my story. Growing up, I was an only child. Some of you look at me like that explains a lot. I was an only child. My father was 11 years older than my mother. My dad was a Vietnam veteran. He was a Marine. Growing up as a little boy going to school, I remember kids would bring their G.I. Joes for show and tell. And they would brag about how they got this one or that new one. And I would brag on, well, I lived with a G.I. Joe. My dad was my hero when I was so tiny. As I would go in, what's so funny is I'd go into his bedroom when he wasn't home because I knew I wasn't supposed to go in his closet. But still, when he wasn't home, I'd go into his closet and there would be this garment bag and I'd unzip it. And it was his military jacket. And his pants, his Marine Corps, and I'd go in there and I'd put it on, and of course it looked like a dress on me, but I'd look in the mirror and I would pretend that I was like a G.I. Joe. You know, it's got all these medals and all these awards and stuff. And it was so cool to me because I would tell my friends all the time, man, my dad could beat you up. He could beat your dad up. My dad's a Marine. But growing up, we grew up in church, being little. As far back as I can remember, I always sit in church. And we went to this church, and my dad, he was, we don't do it now, but they would have testimony service, and he would get up and he'd leave testimony service. And I would always sit back there and I'd watch my dad and be so proud, man. My dad had this contagious smile. Just something about him when he smiled, it just melted your heart, melted the room. And he would get up and begin to talk about what God had done for him. And I remember several times he'd leave his Bible. And while he's up there, I'd grab his Bible. And if you remember in some of the Bibles, there was like blank pages at the beginning and at the back of the Bible. And I would go and I'd sneak and get his Bible and I'd grab a crayon or a pen and I'd write him a little note and then just leave it. And he'd come down, and during part of the Sunday service, he would take teenagers back and he would teach them. Well, when he'd open his Bible, there would be a note for me. And then the next week, I'd go in and I would go to write something else, and he would have something written back to me. And I was like, it just melted my heart. I still have his Bible, and there's times I'll go and I'll just read the notes. But we went to church for a long time there as a kid, and one day we got some bad news. The pastor of our church passed away. And it absolutely devastated my father. This guy was like a father figure to him. And when he passed, my dad had a really hard time staying at that church because the new pastor wasn't him. So I remember my dad telling my mom, he said, we're going to go find a new church. I just can't do this here. So we went and we started looking for a new church. During that time, we got word that my dad was getting a new job. He did landscaping. He won awards for landscaping. And St. John's Hospital wanted to hire him to do landscaping. And they hired him, and he was their plant operations supervisor. And it looked like everything was looking up. Everything was going great. We found a new church. I loved the kids department. It was just I thought God was working this perfect miracle in our life. Well, after a few months, I would notice my mom and dad talking in the front seat. And my mom would always tell me, she said, Paul, not in the car. Not with Putty back there. For those who don't know, my nickname was Putty growing up. Yes, you can make fun of me afterwards, but it was just something my grandma gave me. But my mom would tell me, she says, don't say nothing with him back there. So they would go home, and I would hear them talking in their bedroom. Well, one Sunday after service, my dad got in the car, tears flowing. He looked at my mom, and he said, I can't go to church anymore. He says, I can't do this. And my mom's like, we can get through this. He goes, no. And then he began to talk to her. He says, I can't do something like what they're wanting me to do. And I listened. I was maybe 7.5, 8. And I'll never forget, my dad said, they just want to use me. They don't really like me. They just want to use me. And tears were flowing down his face. He says, I can't do what they want me to do. It is illegal. Find out the church we're going to wanted my dad to get some flowers, some landscaping material, and charge it to St. John's. And they used the thing, well, it'll just be between us. It'll be St. John's tithes to the church. And my dad says, I can't do it. Well, I noticed some things were changing with my dad anyways when he got this new job. My dad would go out. He'd hang out with the guys more. He'd come home. Things were a little different. Well, we stopped going to church. And that was weird, getting up on a Sunday and not going to church. Getting up on a Wednesday, doing our thing. That night, not going to church. Because we always went to church. My dad always kept his Bible right there by his chair. There was a table and his Bible was always there. And then it was gone. That moment, it was like my whole world began to change. I'll never forget my mom coming up to my dad and began to cry, and she's like, Paul, you know what you're doing is not good. You know what's happening with your family with this. And my dad would begin to argue and begin to get angry. And see, I never saw my dad angry. My dad was the type of person that he would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. He was the kindest, most gentle person I've ever met in my life, but he began to get angry. And as a kid, I didn't understand what was going on. Until one day, my dad came home, and he was completely wasted. He was drunk. And my mom begged him and cried, and she says, Paul, you know what you went through with your family. You know what you went through with your father. Why are you doing this? From that moment on, my life changed drastically. I would go into the refrigerator, there was always alcohol. And I never grew up, to that point, ever saw any alcohol. At 8 years old, I'll never forget, these memories are etched in my mind to the day I die. My dad come home from work. He'd go in, he would start drinking. When his drinking started, it was about a 12-pack every 2 or 3 days. Then it became a 12-pack every couple days. Then it became a 12-pack every day. Then it became a 12-pack and a gallon of Ernest and Gallo Chablis Blanc wine. And you're like, well, how do you remember that? It's a smell I'll never forget. He would come home from work. He'd be stressed out. What a lot of people didn't realize, my dad had horrible PTSD from being in the war. He would wake up in the middle of the night screaming and yelling and having flashbacks. And church and God was the only thing that ever felt like he had comfort from that. And when he walked away from God and he walked away from church, he no longer had that comfort. So the alcohol comforted it. Well, that night, he was getting very angry at my mom, something to do with dinner. He had already had probably 8 or 9 beers in him. And I remember I was in my room and I was playing, and I heard the most horrific sound come from the front room. And my mom, she was screaming and yelling and crying. 8 years old, I walked in. I saw my dad beating my mom. He was beating her unmercilessly. I remember just standing there crying. I cried, Dad, please stop. The man I saw was not my dad. Never acted like that. He never hurt anybody. I remember going into my bedroom and running, shutting the door, grabbing my Bible, putting it to my chest, and I began to pray. It's like, God, please help my dad. Please change him. Please have him stop hurting my mom. And I heard wails and cries coming from the other room. This continued on for about 2 years, at least once a month. He would get so drunk, he would beat on her. Age of 10, something snapped inside my head. Something inside my head's like, this isn't right. You got to do something. What's a 10-year-old going to do? I mean, I'm looking at a guy that's 6'1", 6'2", about 180 pounds, ex-military, strong as an ox. What am I going to do? But something in my head saying, you can't stand by and just watch it. So I'll never forget that night. I heard wails and screams coming from the other room. I go into that room, and I watched as my dad had my mom by the hair dragging her across the floor. Mom was bleeding. She was crying, begging for help from somebody. Who's going to help? Some anger rose up in me, and I yelled at my dad. I told him, I said, stop. And I was angry, and I'll never forget. He dropped my mom. He ran over to me, got my face. He said, so you think you're a man now? I'm crying, I'm begging him. I said, I'm not a man. I'm your son. He says, no, you're a man. And that was the first time my dad beat me. Unmercifully beat me. Went to my bedroom afterwards, shut the door, I began to cry. I grabbed my Bible that was always by my bed, and I hugged it, and I prayed, and I said, God, where are you? Where are you? Why are you letting this happen to me? What did I do so wrong, God? And I begged, and I begged, and I cried, and I pleaded with God. I said, please heal my dad. Please save my dad. Months passed. Every time he would go in there to beat on my mom, I'd say something. And he'd beat on me instead. I'm like, well, at least he's beating on somebody else and he's not hitting her. She's already been through enough. She's been through hell. At the age of 12, the beatings went from once a month to once every couple weeks. 12 years old, he was angry at my mom because she wouldn't go write a hot check for alcohol. And he began to slap and hit her, and I said, Dad, stop. He told me, he said, get to your room. My mom was so scared at this point. She said, fine, I'll do it, just stop. She left to go get the stuff. Came out of my room, and he was angry already. I cried and pleaded with him and said, Dad, you can't keep doing this. I really infuriated him by standing up to him. So he began to beat me. This time he beat me, probably one of the worst times he ever beat me. I had blood coming from my nose, my eyes, my ears, my mouth. You name it, there was blood coming from it. He picked me up. He said, you ain't nothing but trash. Threw me through the screen door, went over the banister and landed in the yard. While I'm laying there trying to catch my breath, I'm bleeding. My neighbor, I look over and she's sitting on the front porch. My neighbor, she would always come out when it would start to get cool, and she would sit on the front porch and just look around and just enjoy the weather. She got up from her chair and she leaned over and she looked. In my mind, I'm saying, God, finally, somebody's going to do something to get me out of this nightmare. Somebody's going to go get help. What did she do? She got up, she went inside. I laid there for 15 minutes. Nobody came. So I got up, pretty much crawled, because I couldn't hardly walk, down the side of the house to the alley, and behind the alley, our neighbors had these two big trash cans, almost like dumpsters. I crawled back there, and I laid behind them. I'll never forget, because as I'm laying there, I'm like, this is where I belong. I'm no more than trash. I'm no more than garbage. No one loves me. I remember praying and saying, God, where are you? Where are you in this? So I'm laying there. I'm praying and saying, God, send somebody. What seemed like hours passed. But to a 12-year-old, it's probably 30, 45 minutes. It was extremely dark. I watched my bedroom, or my parents' bedroom light goes out. People say, well, why didn't your mom come get you? Fear for her life. It wasn't her fault. My dad says, we're going to bed. You went to bed. So they went to bed. They came in, went to the kitchen, found the sharpest knife I could find, walked in, looked at my parents' bedroom. They were sound asleep, and went to the bedroom. As I go into my bedroom, I shut the door. I said, God, if you're not going to be here for me, if you do not care and you do not truly love me, I don't want to live like this anymore. I took the knife, put it up against my chest. I said, I'm going to count to 3, and I'm going to push, and I'm going to plunge that thing straight into my heart. People said, oh, you wouldn't have done it. You couldn't hurt. The pain would have been too severe. The pain that I felt on the inside, there is no pain on the outside that you could ever give me that would hurt worse than what I felt on the inside at that moment. I didn't want to live. I didn't care to live. I wanted to die. My hero is now my nightmare. The man that I wanted to be just like, the man that I wrote stuff in the Bible to, is now the person who doesn't love me anymore. Took the knife to my chest, took a big breath in, began to push, blood began to run down my chest. Took another big breath, and the third breath I went to push as hard as I could, and I couldn't get it to go anywhere. I was angry, I kept pushing harder and harder, and it hurt, and blood was coming down my chest, but it would not go any farther. Just the tip. I dropped the knife, I'm angry, I'm like, Ron, you're such a coward. Everything that you have been told is true. You couldn't even kill yourself right. I shook, I grabbed my Bible, and I began to pray, and I'm like, God, if you're really there. See, my prayers changed from God, heal my dad, be there for me, to God, if you're really there, why are you letting this happen? Do you not love me? But every time I still prayed for my dad. I said, God, if you don't love me, at least love him. Heal my dad, save my dad. All I want out of it is I want my dad back. Over time, the beatings got worse. He began to beat on my mom. At this point, I'm saying, I'm done. I can't take this anymore. I told him, I said, I'm calling the police. Yelled it. Ran into my bedroom, slammed the door shut. He comes in there. After hitting my mom so hard, he knocked her out. Kicks the door in. At this point, I had the phone in my bedroom. Had 911. Before I get the last one, he yanks the phone cord out of the wall. He begins to wrap it around my neck. He begins to pull. So I began to try to fight back, and I gasped for breath. I just kept praying, God, where are you? Where are you at? Where are you at in this situation? Do you not care what I'm going through? Remember, as I sit there gasping for breath, my dad began to shake uncontrollably. To the point it was almost like he was having a seizure, just shook and shook. And then all of a sudden he let go and he ran out of the room crying. Time passes, the beatings are worse. I'm going to school in turtlenecks to cover the bruises and the marks. I'm like, somebody's got to know what's going on. But nobody cares enough to do anything about it. At the age of 15, he was beating me one time. He grabbed me by the throat and he picked me up. I was gasping for air again, and all of a sudden, my grandfather comes in the front door. He looks at my dad and I'll never forget the words coming out of his mouth. He said, in the name of Jesus, Paul, put the boy down. But he just screamed it at him. My dad dropped me, Mom was crying, begging him to stop. My dad began to cry. See, what a lot of people don't realize is when I tell you that the stories of when he's drunk, but the stories of when he was sober were different. I lived with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. My dad would sit there and he would bawl and cry the night after he would beat us. The day after, he would cry, not realizing what he did. But when that would happen, it would make it worse because he would drink to forget the pain, which would cause more pain. My grandfather begged us to leave that night. We wouldn't do it. I remember going into my bedroom night after night, grabbing my Bible and praying. But my prayers just began to change. I said, God, help my dad. Save my dad. But God, if you're really real, save me from this. I went to church, did the whole thing, prayed, all this stuff. And in my mind, I'm like, is God really real? If he is, does he really care about me? At 15 and a half, I'll never forget the night. My dad began to drink, and at this night, he drank more than I think I've ever seen him. My mom did something, made him mad with the food. He took the plate of food, cracked it over her head. Said something to him. He got angry, so he cracked the plate over my head. And then he looked at my mom, and he looked at her, and he said, I'm going to kill you. He said, I'm done with this. He said, I'm going to kill you. I stood there. Not one time did I ever fight back at my dad. Not one time did I ever sit there and get angry and say hurtful words at my dad. I took it. I begged. I looked at my dad that night and I said, you're not touching her. Now at 15, I was probably 5'11", it made me weighed 110 pounds. Skinny beanpole. But he said, I'm going to kill you. And I said, no, you're not. You're not going to go to her. You're not going to touch her. If you're going to kill her, you're going to go through me first. Something inside me, an anger arise that I've never felt in my life. He said, fine. You want to be a man? You're first, then her. My dad ran at me from the other side of the room, lunged. Out of pure fear, anger, I don't know, I draw back and I hit my father. Hit him so hard that he fell back, hitting his head on the bookcase, busting every single shelf. I looked down at my dad, bleeding from his mouth, out, my mom screaming. The first thought that went through my head is, I just killed my father. I felt like a horrible son. How can you hit your own father? I had people later on in life tell me, they said, but you did the right thing. He got what he deserved. But no, it's my dad. I grabbed the cordless phone from the kitchen. I ran out to the garage and I called my pastor at that time and I said, I think I just killed my dad. He says, I ain't got time for this nonsense, and hung up. I called what is my father-in-law now. He was the next thing to being a father to me, so I called him up. I said, Larry, I think I killed my dad. He said, what happened? I began to tell him. He said, what I want you to do, he says, I'm going to pray with you here in a minute. And he says, then I want you to go in. I want you to check, see if he's breathing. If he's not, call the police. So I get off the phone with him after he prays with me. I go inside, and my dad's sitting there on the ground. He's dazed. He's bleeding. He's got a knot in his mouth. He's got a knot in the back of his head. My mom's sitting there trying to take care of him. I walked in the door, expecting to see him dead. Instead, he's sitting there. He looked at me and he says, I hate you. He said, I never wish you were born. He said, I wish I never had you. I remember grabbing a few things and I left the house. This was late at night. I didn't have nowhere to go, so I ran. Ran down about 4 or 5 blocks where we lived. There was a big field with this big tray back there, and I laid there and I took a few of the things I had and I made a pillow under this tree. And I prayed, I said, God, where are you? Do you not love me anymore? If you're really real, save my dad. Change my dad, please. I'm begging you. I fell asleep under that tree. Finally moved in with my grandparents. Couldn't go back. Took several months. Finally, my mom moved in with my grandparents. His work found out what was going on. They said, Paul, to keep your job, you're going to have to go to rehab. My dad says, I got to do something. He just began to confess everything. He said, I got to do something. He said, the alcohol's taken over. He said, I'm losing my wife. I've lost my son. I've hurt both of them for years. He said, I got to do something. So they sent him to a rehab facility in Overland Park, Kansas. This time, I'm about 16. He was there for a few months. At this time, we're getting close to Christmas. My dad calls me, wants to talk. My final words to my dad that day was, I hate you. Don't you ever call me again. And I remember my dad begging and pleading with me, saying, son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm sorry. I don't forgive you. I hate you. Don't you ever call me again. I don't want you in my life. I want nothing to do with you. December 22nd, my father calls my grandma. We were at church, like we were every time church doors were open. My grandma couldn't go. She had polio as a kid, and there was times she just couldn't walk. She couldn't move. It hurt her so bad, so she stayed home. She gets a phone call from my dad, and my dad's all excited. He says, I want you to tell Putty something. She goes, what, Paul? He said, I want you to tell him that I have been sober for 2 months now. I've had no alcohol in my system. See, my dad's kidneys were failing him. His liver was terrible from all the alcohol he drank. He had yellow jaundice at this time. He says, you tell him I quit drinking and I'm feeling a lot better. Began to tell her the things he was doing up there. He was volunteering to be what they call a secret Santa. He would dress in a Santa costume, and there's a children's home not far from there. And he said, time I went and I passed out presents to him. He said, but there's one really important thing I want you to tell him. I want you to tell him that I gave my heart to Christ. My grandma was all excited. She told him, she said, Paul, that's the greatest news I think I've ever heard in my life. I remember getting home from church that night, and we lived 2 houses down, and we'd always go to my grandparents' house before we'd go home. Walked in there, and my grandma, she looks at me, and she says, I got some news to tell you. And she began to tell me about my dad. I just went better. She said, but most importantly, he said he gave his heart to Christ. Looked at my grandma, I said, I don't believe him. I've seen this before. He's trying to get me to come home, and then he's going to beat me again. I don't believe it. Still hate him. Don't want nothing to do with him. The next day, December 23rd, my dad walks out that evening of the rehabilitation center, and across the street was a gas station. And my dad went over there and bought a phone card to call me on Christmas and a cup of coffee. How I know what the phone card is, it was a Dan Marino phone card. How I know that is, I still have it. He grabbed the phone card, his cup of coffee, standing on the side of the road waiting to cross. He hits the button, waiting for it to tell him when to cross to go back to the rehabilitation center. And a drunk driver, going really fast, turned the corner, went up on the curb, hitting my father. The irony of that. The same thing that he loved and he gave up still killed him. I'll never forget, I got home from the mall because I was going to buy Christmas presents. And my mom and my aunt and my grandfather met me at the car. Something inside me all the way home told me that something was wrong. I don't know what it was. I get there and they come running out and they're crying and tears are flowing. And the first words out of my mouth to my mother was, what happened to Dad? She said, how did you know? And she's crying. I said, I don't. What's going on? She began to tell me he was hit and killed by a drunk driver. Remember my mom going back in there and talking because they were doing everything they could, just keep him alive. And the doctor told on the phone, he said, there's nothing we can do. I got in my car and I drove off. And I went and I parked right at the house that I lived with him at. The last house that I ever spent time with my father, and I parked it there. And I prayed, I'm like, God, this can't be real. Where are you? I was hoping this was some sick joke. I was hoping that he would walk out the doors. I sit there for hours begging God, let this be a joke. I'm going to get angry at God. I'm like, God, where are you? Do you not love me anymore? Do you not hear me? Are you even real? Time passes and I'm doing the good little Christian boy thing. But inside I'm dying and I'm angry. 18, I get married. My wife had no idea what she was getting into. She met what she thought was this guy, but inside I was just a hurt, broken, angry boy. By 20, I've had all I could have with church. I wanted nothing to do with God. I wanted nothing to do with religion. I was sick of what was going on in the church we went to, the religion we went to. I wanted nothing to do with it anymore. And I remember that night telling her, I said, I ain't doing this anymore. She said, I ain't doing it. I can't. Does it sound familiar? I remember she begged me. She says, we'll go somewhere else. We'll try a different religion. And she was still letting go of all the things that was taught to her whole life. And it was so hard for her to do. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. We were arguing. We were fighting every time. And I was like, I've had enough. And I left. Left my wife. Left everything. 20 years old, I became an alcoholic. I'm not even old enough to buy alcohol. But I'm drinking every night. I am blacking out, drunk every single night. Because you know what? I didn't want to remember anything. One night, I go to a party. Get so blacked out drunk. Next morning, I wake up in a yard. It wasn't even the yard the party was at. It wasn't a yard even near the party. I guess I tried to walk back to where I was staying. Passed out in somebody's yard, covered in my own vomit. Remember sitting there, waking up, looking at myself. And I prayed yet again. I said, God, where are you? I can't do this anymore. God, if you're really real, let my wife take me back. Help me get through this. Where are you? Called my wife up on the phone and I said, can I come home? I can't do this anymore. She said, yeah. She started working for this hotel. And the owners of this hotel were some of the best Christian people I ever met in my life. The owner became like a father to me. Such a great man. And I'll never forget, he sat down and we would talk and I poured my heart out about the stuff I've done and what I went through and what I put my wife through. And he began to tell me, he's like, that's right, Ron. He says, God still loves you. He said, God's still here for you. I remember looking at him and God doesn't love me. If God loved me, why would he allow this to happen to me? What did I do wrong, Dick? What did I do wrong? And he would tell me, he said, Ron, you didn't do anything wrong. I said, then where was God? Where was he when I was going through this? I'd love to say I gave my heart to Christ then, but I didn't. Still angry with God. We moved back from Pittsburgh to Joplin. My wife started working at St. John's. Isn't that ironic? But this time, St. John's wasn't a bad thing for us. She started working with the woman that we both knew as kids. And she began to tell my wife, she's like, hey, me and my husband, we were opening this new church. You and Roger, come check it out. My wife would come home and she'd tell me, she'd like, hey, Crystal invited us to church. No. Not happening. I'm not going to church. Forget it. And I'll never forget my wife, she would cry. She's like, Rod, you don't get this. Austin knows who Ozzy Osbourne is and all his lyrics, but he has never heard you talk about Jesus. And I said, it's going to stay that way. I don't want him knowing about God. I don't want God abandoning him like he did me. And she would cry, and she said, you know that's not true. I said, it's how it felt to me. Where was he? I was angry. Well, she kept pressing because Crystal kept inviting her to church. And every time Crystal invited her to church, she would sit there and tell me about it. And finally, I'm like, all right, I'll go if you'll shut up. So that Sunday, we pull into the parking lot. I parked as far away as I could because I didn't know if me even stepping out of the car, if I was going to burst into flames or what, because that's how much I hated God. We parked as far away as we could. She opened the door, and I'm sitting there white knuckling the steering wheel. She said, you getting out? I said, I can't do this. She goes, why? I said, I'm that angry at God. I can't do this. She cried. She begged me. She says, please just go in. I can't. Let's get in the car. We're going home. Can't do this. So we went home. She started hounding me again. Hey, Crystal invited me to church. What did I tell her? No. That's what you tell her. No. Finally, she says, all right, we'll go on a Wednesday. Just go on a Wednesday. There won't be as many people there. Whatever. Well, Austin fell, got hurt. I'm like, there's your sign, Michelle. God don't want us at church. So we didn't go. Following Sunday, she kept hounding me. I'm like, I'll go one time. I'll walk in that church one time. When I walk out them doors, don't ever ask me again to step foot in the church. She said, fine. She cried. She said, fine. Whatever, just go once. And next Sunday, we went, sat on the parking lot, white knuckle on the steering wheel. She said, you going in? I said, if you'll shut up and leave me alone about it, I'll go in. Getting out of the car, walking to the front, I kept telling her every step, I can't do this. I can't go in there. I don't want nothing to do with God. Can't you get that straight? I hate God. I'm angry. He never answered my prayers. He never listened to me. He abandoned me. We get in the front door, and I'm greeted by some of the friendliest people I ever met in my life. I'm like, whoa, this is not what I'm expecting. This is not what I came out of. Music's playing in the lobby. Probably some of the most beautiful music I ever heard in my life. We get in there, and she said, where do you want to sit? Far away from anybody that can talk to me. So we sat her in this corner, far away as I could get. I said, but I want to be close to the door because when I'm ready to leave, I'm ready to get out of here. So the couple came. They sat on the other end of the row. I looked down there. That guy looked like he didn't want to be here any more than I did. He kept looking at his wife like, I want out of here now. We both sit there miserable. And I kept telling myself, all right, God, I dare you. If you're really real, I dare you. Try to move me. Never forget the first song started. Can't remember the song, upbeat song. We stood, I grabbed the seat and I white knuckled it. And I'll never forget, God began to speak to my heart. And the words that he spoke just broke me. He said, Ron, son, did you have to call me son? You know I ain't got a good relationship with dads, and you are one of them. Son, you tired of running yet? Grabbed that seat and I shook. I cried. I did everything in me. And I broke. I said, yeah, I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being told that you love me, but you really don't. And I never forget, God spoke to my heart and he said, just come home, son. I got up and I ran to the altar. I didn't walk. I ran as fast as I could, fell at my face. And I began to let go of all kinds of hurt and pain. But one thing I didn't let go of was, where were you, God? I remember getting up from praying and God, you can take my life, you can take all this. One thing you're not taking is how I feel about what you did when I was a child. We're getting up praying, I look over, the guy that felt so uncomfortable like I did was at the altar next to me, doing the same thing I was. That guy became one of my closest friends until he died last year. Never forget, the pastor really took me under his wing. He was a young guy, not much older than I was. And I began to talk to him, and I said, Pastor Troy, I need to talk to somebody. I'm really angry with God right now. He said, well, what's going on? And I began to just pour my heart out. He says, have you ever talked to God like this? So you want me to be angry and really talk to God? He goes, yeah. He said, you let it all out. He says, God can handle it if you yell and scream at him. He says, God can handle it if you cussed at him. You don't think he's not heard these things before? I remember I went and I started praying. And I prayed a prayer like I've never prayed before in my life. And it was not a nice prayer. It was the angriest prayer that I ever had. And I yelled at God and I screamed at him, where were you? And I forget, God began to speak to my heart. And he said, will you listen? Yeah, because I want answers. He said, do you remember that night? He said, when you were sitting there and you had that foreign cord around your neck, and you were crying and you were praying and you were begging me. And he said, you remember your dad began to shake and he began to cry? I said, yeah. He said, it was my presence. He says, I was there. He said, you never went through anything that I wasn't there. He said, my presence was so strong, your dad had to let go. He couldn't keep doing it. Why do you think he ran away crying? He said, you remember the night that you sit there and said you were going to take your own life? He said, you know why I wouldn't go in? He said, I have my hand over your heart. He said, you hugged your pillow and you cried. He said, every tear that you cried, he said, I bottled up. He said, you were never at a moment. There was no time that I ever left you. He said, you remember the night he was choking and your grandfather ran in? He said, do you know why your grandfather was there? Oh. He said, I sent your grandfather. He said, your grandfather was praying for you. And I said, get over there now. He said, he called on my name and he left you alone. He said, but I was always there. I remember I began to break and I began to cry. I said, God, but where were you? You never answered my prayers. God said, I answered every single one of your prayers. I said, how? You didn't heal my dad. You didn't save my dad. You didn't do anything I asked of you. I didn't care about myself. I just wanted my dad. My biggest prayer was my dad would change. He would be my dad. God spoke to my heart and he said, I did everything. I said, how? And I began to remember when we got the autopsy back of my dad. We began to look at it. His liver was fine. He had no yellow jaundice. God said, I healed him. I said, but God, you didn't save him. He said, yes, I did. He called and told you guys. I said, but God, why did you take him from me? He said, your heart's desire was that your dad would go to heaven. Your heart's desire was that he would change, that he would become the dad that he was meant to be. He says, so I took him while he was ready. I broke. Said that, why didn't I feel you? He says, just because you can't feel me doesn't mean I'm not there. He said, just because you can't see me doesn't mean I'm not there. Just because you can't hear me doesn't mean I'm not there. He said, in your darkest hours, in your darkest times, he says, I have always been there. And then the scripture began to come to me. Psalms 139, verse 7 through 12, it says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up into the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light becomes night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day. The darkness is as light to you. Even in the darkness, he told me, he's there. That changed me. I would love to tell you that I don't still struggle and I don't have my issues. But I still know at the moments that God is still there. There are things that have happened over the past 10 years that I could not have made it through if it wasn't for him. I said all this to say this. Some of you here tonight, you know what darkness feels like. Some of you are going through some of the darkest moments of your life right now, and you don't know how you're going to survive. You have prayed and you have cried out to God. And you have sat there and begged and pleaded for things to change. And you feel like he's not listening. That he doesn't care anymore. I'm just here to tell you, he's seen every time you've cried into your pillow. Them sleepless nights crying. And you think, God, you're not there. You don't love me. I'm here to tell you he does. All them tears you've cried, he has bottled up. The word says that he bottles every tear. Why? Because it means that much to him. Your tears, your heartaches, your pain, he feels them. When you get the word or the papers, your wife, your husband, they want a divorce, and you feel so dark, you feel so alone, I'm here to tell you, even in the darkness, he's still there. When you get the doctor's report and the doctor says there's no hope, make your affairs with your family, set everything straight. You're going to die. I'm here to tell you he's still there. I want God to heal me. Why isn't God healing me? I keep thinking back to Christian Hennedy. I know so many prayers went up for him. People are like, God, where are you? Why didn't you answer our prayer? I know I prayed that prayer for my grandfather when he died. So many times I prayed, God, please heal him. God still answers your prayers. Because even if we're not healed in the physical, when we pass over to the spiritual, it's a new body with no more pain, no more suffering. And even in the moments that look the darkest and you feel like God's given up and that God's not there and he's ran, he's still there. I keep thinking back to when I walked away from God. And I know there's people who's walked away from God. And they're angry at situations with God just like I was. The best way I can say this is the way it's been led in my heart. As in the moments God is, imagine a fight, like an MMA fight. And right now you're in the ring and you're getting beat. You're getting pummeled. And you don't know what you're going to do to carry on. And it looks like your darkness is all around you and you're about to just go down. All God's waiting for is that one word. He's just waiting to say, God, forgive me. I need you. Then the fight's on. Because at that point, God says, this is no longer your fight. This is mine. So I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what you're going through. But I do know that even in this darkness, even in this world that we're living in right now, even in this heartache, this pain, disease, sickness, loneliness, God's still there. Everybody, if you'd bow your head, close your eyes for a minute. I know there's people in here that right now you're suffering. And you think you're suffering alone. And many nights you cry and you beg out and you plead to God. You beg Him for something to change and it doesn't. I'm here to tell you, He's here. He's never left your side. He said, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. He will walk to the ends of the earth with you. I'm just here to ask you to let it go. Stop fighting. Stop running. He loves you right where you're at. He held you when you cried in your bed. He held you as you sit there and you fell apart. The nights that you didn't even want to live, He was there holding you. If you're going through something and you feel like the darkness is surrounding you, no one looking around, I just want to pray with you. I know what darkness feels like. I know what it feels like to feel alone. To feel like nobody cares. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not going to ask you to come front. If you just want someone to be there and pray, I'll pray when I go home. I'll pray when I go to bed tonight. I just want you to know you're not alone. But if that's you, and you just say, Ron, I need prayer. I can't do this on my own. Just raise your hands. Thank you. You're not in this alone. There's never going to be a moment that God doesn't care. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, I thank you. I thank you for what you've done in my life. I thank you that you never left me. You never failed me. You loved me when I was unlovable. You loved me at my lowest, and you still love me at my highest. God, I ask that you would show that same love to those that are out there feeling lost and alone right now, God. God, I ask that right now they feel that warm sensation inside of them, that hug, that embrace. God, I ask that you would speak to their heart and let them know they're not alone, that you care. God, I just ask that you just begin to love on them in a way that they have never felt love before. And God, if there's someone here that they have walked away, God, I ask that you just begin to work on their heart. Let them know that you are here and that you love them. God, I thank you. I thank you for everything that you've done. God, if I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't change nothing because you brought me to where I am today. My trials in my past brought me to where I am. And it made me who I am, and I'm thankful for that. God, I thank you for everything, and I love you. In your name we pray. Amen. We love you guys. If you need to talk, we have people in the corner that would love to talk with you, pray with you. And we'll see you next week. And don't forget your children.